Good evening and welcome to Artbeat on 103.2 Dublin City FM. I'm Amy Fitzgibbon and you're very welcome to the programme. So as we draw near to the end of 2021, we are now very much at the centre of what is arguably the most challenging and sensitive period in the Decade of Centenaries. We've had the anniversaries of the struggle for independence and partition and are now looking ahead to the anniversaries of the foundation of the state and the Civil War. We know these events have many different types of significance for many different people around the country and indeed for the Irish diaspora abroad, and therefore have the need to be treated with the utmost sensitivity. The controversy that erupted over the centenary church service in Armagh to mark partition earlier this year is just one example of the complexity around commemorating this period. This evening, I'll be speaking to Helen Beaumont, Education and Outreach Officer for the National Museum of Ireland's Decorative Arts and History Collection at Collins Barracks, and Anthony Haughey, who was recently appointed as Artist in Residence at the museum until the end of 2022. Helen and Anthony joined me on Artbeat back in June to discuss how preparations by the National Museum for the Decade of Centenaries were going, something in which Helen and Anthony are both intimately involved. They are joining me again this evening to give an update on what's been happening. So Anthony and Helen, you're very welcome back to the programme. So Anthony, the last time you were on the show, you spoke about the importance of community and the importance of collaborating with communities as part of creating the artworks to commemorate these important milestones. So I might come to you first on this. How has the art or artworks been developing?
Yes, Amy, it's been an interesting couple of months. We're really rocketing into this various projects through the museum. And there's about 3 or 4 projects in various stages of collaboration. One is coming to fruition very quickly, actually this week, at the end of this week. And that project is connected. It's called A Dress for Akuma. And it reflects the one of the museum collections around the area of costume and design. The exhibition itself is called The Way We Wore. And walking through that in the early days of the residency, it just struck me that the materiality of being in that space and looking at these amazing designers, mostly Irish, and looking at a kind of history of historical narrative of how we wore those clothes and, what that means socially, culturally, and politically. So thinking about that, an idea came to mind. And to cut a long story short, I started to collaborate with a group of 20 African Irish women who are interested in this area. And we started to think about, wouldn't it be interesting to design a transcultural dress that reflected and spoke to the museum collection in a different kind of way? So in order to do that, we started to research the various parts of the museum, particularly the Archaeology Museum, came across the Ogham stones, which is a very early form of Irish language. And at the same time, wanted to find an African-Nigerian equivalent. So we started to look at that and all those beautiful designs that you can see in the Museum of Archaeology on the gold hoard collections and other early artifacts. These kind of rudimentary pictographic signs that have symbolic meaning. So that was one part of it. And then in the research, we were looking at quite generic early African symbols, which are quite well known. But then there's this kind of eureka moment where we found this very early southeastern Nigerian, very specific language to the Igbo culture and tribe. And there's an uncanny resemblance to Celtic imagery and Celtic symbols. So what we're doing, and the interesting thing about that with this group of women, they had never been exposed to this. It's probably one of the earliest forms of African Nigerian language. But during their school times, because of the colonial system, they were never exposed to that history. So it was a revelation to them as well to find this material.
Right.
So we're bringing those 2 languages together, and we've created a fabric. And that fabric it is being designed into a garment by an artisan African-Nigerian dressmaker. And the project is called A Dress for Akuma. And Akuma is a young woman who I've known for a long time. I met her when she was 8 years old in direct provision in Mosney. And now she's a mother, married, with her first child. So she's been invited into this elder women's group. And part of that initiation will be to wear this dress. So the dress will form both a collaborative and, I suppose, a direct connection to the museum's collections. So I'm hoping through this initiation, a different kind of conversation will start, and perhaps speak back to that idea of where we are today in a much more, culturally diverse society. And it's going to be a very beautiful artifact, I think.
Can I come in for a second, if that's okay? Just to say, I suppose Anthony has shared with some of us in the museum the design that he and the group have come up with, and it's absolutely beautiful. And I suppose I'm going to be here on Sunday for this event, and I'm really excited to meet the group of women that Anthony's been working with, and see this beautiful dress. And I'll be taking some of them around the Way We Wore gallery, talking about, I suppose, how we, always communicate through our clothing, and how our clothing tells stories about us or about the times in which we have lived in. But I'm really hoping that it will be a very kind of a conversation, really, more than a tour.
Yeah, I know, because I think you spoke about that the last time, Anthony, on the programme, about the need to talk about, who we are today as well. It's kind of how the past informs the present. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, this is the driving force that, we are a culturally diverse nation. And, we begin to use this term, and it's interesting to me because I think that second generation migrants from Africa are beginning to call themselves African Irish, as you would in, the American kind of terminology, like, African American. I find that really interesting. There's a real confidence in that. So, we do have these new cultures, and we do need to include them as well. So they are part of that conversation. And I think that conversation is really important. So that's one project which I'm really, really excited about. Then there's another project which is connected to, more directly perhaps, to the Anglo-Irish Treaty signing, which the centenary will occur on the 6th of December. So with a connected project, I'm going to be working in Fort Dunree in the Inishowen Peninsula in Donegal. We're taking over Fort Dunree for that day, and we're making an artwork which is a kind of a citizen's action, which will mark the centenary of the Anglo-Irish Treaty signing, which I'm particularly interested in.
Okay. What will that involve?
Well, that's connected again to the museum and the museum collections, because we spoke about this before. I'm really interested in the flag collection and the banners. So what I've been doing over the summer, collaborated with probably around 55, 56 people straight after lockdown, which was, again, really exciting just to get out in the world. And restrictions had been lifted that week, and I literally jumped in the car and spent the next 10 days kind of getting into this project, meeting people. And during that time, so over the summer, I've been running workshops around flag design. So we're reflecting on this moment. Flags are so important in terms of commemoration. They're so important in terms of even shifting cultural identities. So to give an example, on the Fort Dunree was what was known as a treaty port. So it was also central to the Anglo-Irish Treaty negotiation. Right. Fort Dunree and two other ports were kept basically by the British Navy strategically until 1938. When they were finally handed back, it was a very simple flag lowering and flag raising event. And interestingly, in this particular part of Donegal, the flag bearers, who were sergeants in the respective British Army and Irish Army, they were brother-in-laws.
Right.
So for me, this kind of
encompasses what it's all about, really, doesn't it?
In a way. Yeah. So that kind of, conflict and then, connection with, I suppose, the British Army had moved in there. They kind of assimilated into that local area, so they intermarried and so on. So all of that's going on. Yeah. But the flag project is, for me, it's a citizen action that really moves us from something that would have been a much more symbolic militaristic occasion. And the idea is that all these people are designing their own flags that reflect on their ideas about that area, but also a future flag for Ireland. Okay. So at the same time, kind of reimagining what this republic might be in the future. So this is the start of what is going to be a very large project connected to the National Museum, which will encompass that project as well. Ultimately, those flags, I think, will end up in or around the collection, or certainly there will be a huge event, probably sometime in 23. But you can imagine, I've already collaborated with close to about 140 people in that short time. I think that's quite extraordinary.
That is, and obviously the flag is such a huge part of the national identity. It's interesting, we're kind of so familiar with it now, but it's interesting to kind of look at it again critically and see why it is how it is and how it could maybe change, as you say, into the future.
I think so, because at the heart of this, what is left, if you like, of what some people call an unfinished revolution, or, the idea that Ireland is still divided, whatever side you're on, that kind of battle for hearts and minds still goes on. But at the same time, whatever the solution is, we have to be cognizant of all sides. And it's no longer, as I've said before, it's no longer that polarity of unionist, loyalist versus Catholic, nationalist, Republican. That binary has shifted somewhat. Now we live in a country where over 100 languages are spoken. We have many cultures. We also have to consider other forms of cultural identity that have come to the fore that wouldn't have been mentioned 100 years ago, like sexuality, like class. All of these things play a role now. So I find, this is central to my project, I think.
And it's interesting, like when you talk about bringing other cultures in, other nationalities, because obviously those nationalities, they will have their own, their own histories and their own struggles in the past. So it's interesting to kind of bring them in and have them kind of look at our struggles, because it shows that the struggles are they're a global thing. It's not just one country that goes through it. There's a lot of countries that go through it, and maybe in that we can kind of find some sort of comfort from each other.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we share. I suppose particularly Nigeria and other African countries, they are post-colonial countries. They're quite young. They share a similarity. Well, Nigeria is younger than Ireland. Now we're at Ireland's at 100, literally. And there's other countries like India and, African countries that are much younger. So they're, you could argue they're still struggling to find their own kind of cultural identity as Ireland is in another way.
Yeah. If I can come in for there, just I suppose, I think that to go back to the project, the address for Akuma, I think it embodies what you're saying in a way, Anthony, about bringing sort of, symbolism or hieroglyphics, if you like, or writing from one culture and bringing it together with another culture and creating something kind of like something new, which is a combination of the two, or a kind of a conversation between the two, in that fabric that's been created. And I think that's, I suppose the museum is also a really, I think, a very kind of opposite space for that sort of bringing together of cultures and being able to kind of look at culture in multiple ways, that there's different kind of perspectives that and the space for that in the museum that maybe sometimes there isn't in other places.
Yeah, what do you think? I agree with that. Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Actually, it was interesting last night. I met with, I was at an event and I was talking to Professor Luke Gibbons. And, he had a really interesting take on the museum exhibit itself. He often said in literature and cultural theory, the exhibition itself is often ignored. So, but he's foregrounding the importance of the materiality of the exhibition and the narrative of the exhibition and what that actually does. So, it shouldn't be a top-down approach where, writers, cultural theorists are kind of stating, or historians are stating how things are. I think the actual vernacular of exhibitions speak back and can speak back in ways. And I think that's where the museum is really interesting to me, because again, we spoke about this in earlier. the idea that artifacts aren't just these kind of abstract things like a dress or, you know, a sword or a rifle. They are imbued with cultural narratives, social narratives that are connected to people's lives. So they live. Museums live. They're living things. They're living archives.
And there's interesting research out there that what happens in museums when people are in museums, what they talk about is their own experience. Right. Like, so they're looking at a display, but actually they bring it back to their own experience, and it triggers them to talk about themselves. So there's something in what you're saying, and Luke Gibbons is really interesting, and he's spoken at some of the, you know, some of the events that we've run at the museum, and he's fantastic.
Full of insights. And Helen, the anniversary of the Anglo-Irish Treaty is coming up this December. So previously we spoke about the NMI collaborating with Dublin City Gallery, the Hugh Lane, in an exhibition due to open this year based around events related to the signing of the treaty. So what can visitors expect from this studio and state exhibition?
Yeah, Anthony and myself met today actually with the curator of the exhibition, Edith Andrews, who works in the museum. And Edith took us around the exhibition, which will open at the end of November to the public. I think it's the 24th of November it's going to open. So Edith and myself and Anthony and Jessica O'Donnell from the Hugh Lane Gallery kind of just went around the exhibition isn't ready yet, but we were just looking at some of the objects that are going to feature in the exhibition. It sort of focuses on the kind of time leading up to the signing of the Anglo-Irish Treaty on the 6th of December. And there's a lot of, I suppose, there's a lot of paper-based material in the exhibition, notes and handbills and letters and pamphlets, sort of, you know, arguing the pro and anti-treaty side. And then there's also these paintings by Lavery, which will feature. These are loaned from the Hugh Lane, and they're going to feature in the exhibition. I'm not sure how many paintings altogether, but all the Irish signatories and 4 of the British signatories. And myself and Jessica O'Donnell, who's the head of education at the Hugh Lane, were collaborating on a kind of an engagement program, which will involve Anthony as well. But we're looking at having a kind of a conference that will focus on a kind of a range of themes, including what Anthony was referencing just there, the kind of where politics and art intersect, and how art is used in activism and also propaganda, to looking at also, you know, that whole period around the signing of the treaty, the commemoration, memory, and I suppose the legacy of the signing of the treaty as well.
The legacy of it, absolutely. And speaking of how we kind of see ourselves today and who we are as a people today, we spoke briefly the last time, Helen, about the Little Houses exhibition, which is an example of the collaboration between the museum and the local community. So this is an exhibition of artworks created by young people living in Stoneybatter during the early days of lockdown last year, depicting spaces or places that were meaningful to them during this extraordinary time. The exhibition launched earlier this month. So what has the reaction been like to Little Houses so far?
I think it's been great, and it's a really lovely. It's a very unusual exhibition, and I think it's been really positive. We had a lovely day here last Wednesday when Malcolm Noonan, Minister for Heritage, launched the exhibition, and it was a real celebration of community, because a lot of the people that were involved in the project, as well as the young people from Stoneybatter Youth Service and the youth workers, there were a lot of people that helped us or worked on the project, like a local videographer, Luke McManus, and a local photographer, Andy Sheridan. So it was great. And then also some of the craftsmen from the Mendicity Institution's workshop came along as well. So it was really important.
Yes, I went to see it myself the other weekend, and I have to say it was a real burst of colour as well. It was really, really nice to come into the room. So thank you so much again, Helen and Anthony, for coming on to the show, for joining me. It was really interesting, and I wish you all the best with the upcoming public programmes and commemorations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.